Hello and welcome to Friday Live. I am Amanda Farmer and I am here with you on the Your Strata Property Facebook page. We're heading out to LinkedIn as well today. How are you doing? How has your week in Strata been, or 2 weeks in Strata? Actually, has it been? No, it's only been 2 weeks since our last Friday Live. I was about to say, has it been 3 weeks since we've done a Friday Live? No, I was scheduled to be here with you last week. Maybe it was 3 weeks. Someone will let me know. But due to some other pressing professional commitments, I do pretend to be a strata lawyer sometimes and do those billable hours, those tribunal and court appearances. I wasn't able to be here with you last week, but it's great to be here today. It has been a big week. Had a webinar this week for Waverley Council on Tuesday. It was wonderful to see so many familiar names there on the webinar. If you missed out, don't worry. There is going to be another webinar focused on bylaws and the power that we have inside our bylaws and our bylaw making to improve our communities. There will be another one. Date's not firm yet, but it should be within a few weeks' time. So hopefully within the month, I will be back with you with a bylaw webinar. So if you missed this week, don't worry. Big week around the country, of course, as many of us press on in lockdown, and we do continue to watch those case numbers rise, particularly in Sydney and now in Melbourne. This is concerning many of us in the Strata community in particular, I know, as we inevitably see an increase in the number of positive cases in our apartment buildings. I know strata managers, friends and colleagues of mine I've been speaking to are dealing with more and more of those cases every day. I will be talking a little bit later today about a communication direct from Dr. Kerry Chant, the New South Wales Chief Health Officer, sent to the attention of all strata managers in this state. Many of you I know have already seen that, letting you know how you can be assisting the effort, particularly when it comes to contact tracing. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that direction, make sure that you have all seen it and understand what it means. I'm also hoping to talk to you a little bit about this week's podcast episode. Ross Taylor from Ross Taylor and Associates. We only released that one yesterday. Already I have been getting lots of feedback from owners, from some contractors, waterproofing contractors, experts in the space as well, about the issues that Ross and I were talking about on this week's podcast episode. I would love it if you caught the episode. If you want to drop me a comment here, either on LinkedIn or on Facebook, I will be able to see all of those. Let me know your thoughts, and if you have any questions arising out of that episode, we'll have a chat about that. And also, because I missed last week, I didn't get to join you on Friday to talk about pets. One of my favorite topics, as many of you will know, and a bit sad because we had new law in New South Wales commencing last Wednesday. Very interesting new law for the keeping of animals in our strata schemes. I won't say more than that right now. We are going to definitely dig into that. And already lots of you, lots and lots. I was going to mention it's a beautiful day outside, and I hope many of you got out, had some exercise, however limited, and got some fresh air. I thought maybe we wouldn't have too many eyeballs live here with us because of the beautiful weather on a Friday afternoon, but we do. So these are important issues to be across, or maybe you just like joining in on a Friday afternoon. Some of you may have a Friday drink in hand. I can see these hellos. I'm going to head over to the comments. David is saying hi from Neutral Bay, and nice to see you, David. Casey is here. Peter is here saying happy Friday. Happy Friday to you too, Peter. I could see your emoji there. Yes, we are masked up as we need to be. Hey, Kevin. Jane is here from Waverton. Nice to see you, Jane. Always good to have you joining us. Yes, Rochelle has popped in the link there to Ross's podcast episode, our podcast chat from this week. We are going to get into that. right now. Why not? The title for this week's podcast episode, The $800 Leak Fixed for $2.5 million. How we are getting Strata remedial works wrong. Now, I didn't make up those figures. If you've had a listen to the episode, you'll know that title and those figures come from an example that Ross shares with us in the podcast about a $2.5 million quote that a building had received to stop a leaking roof. And with some further analysis carried out by Ross, it turned out that leak could actually be fixed for $800. So that's a little bit scary. I have received some comments under the episode and some comments in my inbox, listeners emailing me. And I want to share with you the words from Owen. I'm not sure if, I think Owen is an expert in the industry or a contractor at least. And Owen has said, Amanda, this was spot on, the podcast, and hit the nail on its head on every point. I have been in the building industry for 50 plus years, building cottages, 3-story walk-ups, high rises in the city. I ended up running a large construction outfit in Australia. I can relate to Ross's pitch. In addition, I also have a number of units and have never attended any AGMs. Likewise, I built 21 waterfront units in the 70s in Des Moines. Don't laugh, for a total price of $309,000. Still standing and fetching high prices. A strata commissioner is a plausible solution, says Owen, to get some standards on foot, which in a strata scheme, there are still 3-story blocks of 18 floating around. These buildings were pretty solid, but not pretty. Waterproofing is an issue. Water will find its way. And it's important to get to the root of the problem, which is not being done in most strata buildings. And that's definitely what I've been hearing in my inbox from owners. I have a message here from Rudy saying, Amanda, just listened to Ross Taylor's podcast regarding waterproofing issues in apartment buildings. This relates to our building's issues. This is our building. And that's what I said to Ross on the podcast in our interview. Ross, I'm sure we're going to have listeners who are hearing these examples and saying, this is us. This is exactly what we are going through. And in the chat, I actually gave an example from a building that I own in, where I am a committee member. And a few years ago, this is how I came to learn that this was not uncommon in buildings, that remedial work was being carried out. Owners were paying upwards of $1 million for remedial work to be done, usually to balconies, sometimes to building roofs, expecting that the leaks would be stopped. And then years down the track, the leaks are continuing. I received an SMS, a private SMS from a friend of mine. I won't out who this person was, but he said, excellent podcast, a no-nonsense man in Ross and a straight shooter, well-informed. Waterproofing is as big an issue as cladding. It was a problem 50 years ago, and with dodgy builders now infesting the industry, it will be an issue for many years more. Lack of prepping and thorough cleaning of the slab prior to install is a big problem. Competent, independent, full-time supervision of the whole process is needed at the time of installing, but it's unlikely that will happen. And Ross and I do talk about that, the reluctance on the part of committees, owners, to spend money on this kind of work, to get the proper analysis. And that's really Ross's message, doing the proper analysis and assessment straight up to make sure the problem, the actual problem, is diagnosed properly in the beginning. That's a cost. Ross was talking about the $50,000 scope of works and report when compared to the $8,000 report and scope of works. And I understand from the strata manager's perspective, trying to convince or recommend to your committees that that's the way to go is really, really difficult. I'm interested to hear what you thought of Ross's views on what he called the codependent relationship that exists between strata managers, remedial engineers or remedial consultants, and I add in there committees. This relationship that builds up of being process orientated, time poor, perhaps lacking in some skills to be able to properly project manage, and having remedial engineers who then fit their quotes in quite nicely around that process to keep both committees and strata managers happy. That was something that was really ringing quite true to me in my experience as both an owner and as a strata lawyer, seeing how we may have developed this culture, codependent culture, as Ross calls it, and that may be part of our problem when it comes to these difficulties down the track with ineffective works. Ross was very clear, and I support his position, that he's not talking about all strata managers, he's not talking about all committees, and he certainly was not talking about all remedial consultants. But it's definitely an area that I know Ross is working closely with our building commissioner on when it comes to new builds. But it's so important that we don't forget those buildings, 40-plus-year-old buildings. They're the buildings that I buy in. They're the buildings that I own in. And I know many savvy investors like to put their money into those older buildings. Those buildings are absolutely having these problems and having to do remedial works projects 3 times over because the leaks are still there. We need to get this problem solved. So many more of you coming on in, and I want to give you a hello. Hi there, Cindy. Good to see you. Natalie Fitzgerald is here. Hi, Natalie. Virginia, happy Friday to you. I love these happy Fridays. I love these happy sentiments, and I can't hear any of you, and I can't see any of you, but you sound happy, and that is good. That is good to hear, to see. Aidan is here saying hi. Henry, good afternoon from Melbourne, our lockdown Melburnians. Once again, we're hanging in there with you. Hey, Kevin, good to see you with a thumbs up. Margaret is here. Hi, Margaret. John is saying hi. Anne is saying hi. Love it. You guys are chatty. You guys are chatty today. So I have given you a little bit of a rundown on our podcast chat with Ross Taylor this week. Rochelle has popped the link in there in the comments if you haven't yet checked it out. If you had a listen and you have some views on what we were talking about, feel free to drop them in the comments here. I'm more than happy to come back around and continue that conversation. And a hello coming in from Debbie, who is in Brisbane. Hey, Debbie. Good place to be right about now. I have also promised that today I am going to share with you Dr. Kerry Chant's instructions that have been issued to strata managers this week. I am going to do that in a moment. But next, let's talk about pets. Didn't have a chance to talk about it last week, but it was an important week for all of us involved in strata in New South Wales. We have some new law. It is Section 137B of our Strata Schemes Management Act, together with, you can't forget this bit, this snuck up on us a little, but there is a regulation. It is Regulation 36A in our Strata Schemes Management Regulation. Now, I did give you a bit more of a detailed rundown on this law in last week's podcast episode number 276. Does your pet bylaw stack up? Was the title to that episode. And that too, similar to this week's chat with Ross Taylor, that too got lots of you talking and emailing me, lots of comments under that episode on the page. In particular, some questions about whether indeed it remains unreasonable to have a blanket ban on pets and whether those blanket bans are illegal, whether weight limits are illegal, whether limits on the number of animals in a scheme are illegal. Now, in the podcast, I gave my view that I believe all of those things are going to be considered harsh, unconscionable, or oppressive pursuant to our Court of Appeals guidelines set down in Cooper. And what our new legislation does is provide some clarity around the kinds of activities that might be considered unreasonable interference. When an owner has a pet, our new law says that that pet cannot unreasonably interfere with another occupant's use or enjoyment of the common property. And we have a list of 10 different circumstances that might be considered unreasonable interference. And I've suggested that if you have a bylaw in place that relates to the keeping of animals in your strata scheme, almost all of you, I should hope, would have that kind of a bylaw, that you revisit that bylaw. and see if it needs some updating now that we have this new legislation. The starting position with our new legislation is really that animals are permitted. We're allowed to have animals in our apartment buildings, in our units. What it's telling us is that as long as those animals do not unreasonably interfere with another occupant's use or enjoyment of their lot or the common property, then the animal should be allowed to stay. The owners corporation, the committee, should not be preventing that animal. So that's the starting point, and it becomes about regulating the outcomes of keeping that animal rather than the fact of keeping that animal, which those of you who have been listening to my podcast and these chats for a while, that will sound familiar to you. It's something that I've been saying for a while is the direction that our legislation needs to head in. And I believe that's where it is at now. Still some cases floating around of buildings trying to uphold blanket bans on pets. I've got one at least on my books at the moment that seems to be continuing. So it will be interesting to see those kinds of bylaws tested against this new legislation and see how that legislation is indeed interpreted by our tribunal. I did have a question from a client this week, not one that I think has come up before, but it's a great one. Amanda, does this new law apply equally in commercial strata buildings as it does in residential? And my short answer was yes. The Strata Schemes Management Act and these sections, new section 137B and regulation 38, do apply to a commercial strata scheme, assuming you have an owners corporation, just as you do in a residential strata scheme, and it's not a community association or some other stratum subdivision, a little bit more complex. But yes, there's no differentiation that this is strictly residential strata schemes. So this client was saying, Amanda, I own an office in a commercial building and there's a set of bylaws and there's a complete pet ban, but I have a dog who is my companion animal who goes everywhere with me and we want to be able to take him into the office. So is this bylaw now invalid? And what I have said there is that I think it's important with commercial buildings to understand exactly what's going on in the building, who is in the building, what kind of businesses are there, what the setup is, what the layout is. Commercial buildings are indeed quite different to residential buildings. If we're thinking of standard office block, for example, a bit easier for people to be coming and going, for office tenants to be moving around, more common areas, shared kitchens, shared facilities. In that situation, the opportunities for unreasonable interference may indeed be greater. The greater opportunity for unreasonable interference of an animal. So a pet ban or a quite restrictive pet bylaw in a commercial building may in fact get through. It may be the kind of bylaw that in those circumstances would be valid. So really interesting question. Hadn't thought of that one before, hadn't had that one asked before, but I have said to this person, let me find out more about your commercial building and let me have a look at your bylaw in particular and have a closer look at that one. So if that has come up for anybody, I'd be interested to know your thoughts. I am heading over to your comments because I'm seeing perhaps some questions there. Aidan is saying, we are in a sticky situation as our community association bylaw still overarches the bylaws of the strata scheme and has restrictions on both weight and number of animals. I'm so glad that you raised that, Aidan, because indeed your community association bylaws, the bylaws in your community management statement, override the bylaws of your strata scheme. Yes, and you've said you've got a strata scheme there, and that's in our strata legislation. The CMS prevails. We don't, someone will tell me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, we don't have the same new laws in our Community Land Management Act, but I think you can assume with some degree of confidence that eventually we will, because our Community Land Management Act revisions, whenever that law gets changed, it tends to reflect, it tends to follow the changes in our strata law. The new law that is due to commence, still due to commence in November, I think, our new Community Land Management Act 2021 incorporates the harsh unconscionable or oppressive requirements or prohibition, I should say, that's in our strata schemes legislation. So those pet bans in particular are going to be tested, I think, against that same principle, that same threshold that was tested in Cooper, and that will start to apply equally to our community associations. But I'm conscious there, Aidan, that you're talking about restrictions on weight, restrictions on the number of animals. Definitely those harsh, unconscionable or oppressive provisions, I think when they come in, will be difficult. It'll be difficult for the community association to continue to uphold that bylaw if challenged. But yes, interesting to see how our tribunal might deal with that one. Thank you for sharing. Natalie is saying, love our dog-friendly Watso workplace, but it does only work because of the rules and the amount of space available. Thank you for that example, Natalie. Commercial buildings with those shared co-working spaces, some of those companies have been really forward-thinking, I think, in fitting out their spaces in a way that tenants can bring their animals with them, which I think is great, as I openly say, pro-pet apartment owner here, pro pets, full stop. So yes, I was mentioning earlier, a client, anyone who's just tuning in now, I can see lots of you coming on in, a client who was questioning a pet ban in a commercial building. So it will be important to have a look at how that commercial building is structured, I think, and what the space is like to be able to work out whether a pet ban is legal in those kinds of buildings. Heather is saying, I also have a community association with strata schemes within it, and they all have no pet bylaws. Yeah, I mentioned this, I think I mentioned it on the Waverley webinar on Tuesday, that this is often a conflict between community associations and owners corporations, the pet rules. The strata schemes been a little bit quicker, perhaps, to change their pet bylaws, but the community associations bylaw prevails. That might be the next flood of litigation challenging our community management statements and the pet bans that are in those community management statements. Thank you for letting me know your experiences and your questions there. You are welcome to pop your questions into the comments. I like to answer questions when I'm doing a solo Friday live here. It is a good opportunity to do so. I have let you know a quick summary of some comments that I have been receiving from this week's podcast chat with Ross Taylor. So if you haven't checked that out, do go and do that. We've had a chat about where we're at with our current law on pets in New South Wales. But right now, I would like to show you a copy of the letter that was issued by New South Wales Chief Medical or Chief Health Officer, I think is her official title, Dr. Kerry Chant. It was issued early this week, and I will just share my screen with you here. Many of you will have seen this. I know it has been circulated by Strata Community Association and also, I believe, OCN. I'm just checking that I'm sharing the correct document here. There we go. I'm hoping that you can see that on your screen. I'll just scroll down so you can actually see the New South Wales Health details there. Now, this is, as I understand it, the first time, when we get to the bottom, you'll see it signed off by Dr. Kerry Chant, the first time we've received a direct communication with an encouragement that this be drawn to the attention of our strata managers in New South Wales. I'll read a little bit of it for you. I appreciate some of you might be on your phones and not able to see that. Dear strata manager, the COVID outbreak in New South Wales continues to grow. The Delta variant of COVID-19 is highly transmissible. We've seen an increase in cases residing in residential apartment buildings, and we've also seen some instances of the spread of COVID-19 between residents in common areas of apartment blocks. I'm writing to seek your support in New South Wales Health's management of the current COVID-19 outbreak. What support is that? It's quite clear. New South Wales Health requests that you ensure strata roles are up to date and available to provide to the New South Wales Health contact tracing team upon request. Please ensure the strata role includes the name, address, contact phone number, and email address of all owners and tenants. We also ask that you ensure residents have contact details for their strata managing agent or owners corporation to provide to New South Wales Health. on request. In the event of a positive case in a residential apartment building, New South Wales Health may ask you to distribute information to the residents and place signage in the common property area. And indeed, as we all know, because we're clever cookies here, under the Act, the Owners Corporation is required to prepare and maintain an up-to-date strata roll, including details of all owners and tenants, and transfer of that information to New South Wales Health for this purpose is permitted under the Public Health Act. Your assistance in streamlining the contact tracing process in this way can play a major role in decreasing risk to your building residents. Now, this part's really important. It's tucked in there towards the end, at the end of a short paragraph. But it says this: given the risk of COVID-19 transmission, communal areas such as gyms, lounges, and theatres should be closed at this time. Okay, let's set aside for the minute that many of us probably don't have lounges and theatres in our apartment buildings. Many of us do have gyms, pools as well. Now, I will be putting pools in this category. These are examples. They are not limited to these things that are listed. This is a recommendation. We have the word should here. It is a suggestion. It is a very sensible suggestion, a very sensible recommendation. I have been speaking with those who have a seat at the table with government and those who are representing all of us in discussions with government, and I know that they are asking in the most serious of terms, asking our government to actually put this requirement in our public health order in New South Wales. It is not yet there. We don't have on my reading of the order, and this is backed up by other lawyers I've been speaking to about this issue, we do not yet have a requirement, a direct legal requirement to close our gyms and our pools in our residential apartment buildings in New South Wales. But I know many of you have done that. You have understood the risk. Committees have decided that that is what they will do to best protect their residents, and they've gone ahead and done that some time ago. It's not clear to us why our New South Wales government seems to think this can't go in a public health order or shouldn't go in a public health order. Many lawyers I know have discussed this with them, and in our view, we say you do have the power, the authority to mandate in a public health order the closure of gyms and pools in particular, and we've said that that should happen to make this task easier for our strata managers, for our committees. It shouldn't be left up to a strata manager to suggest, to recommend, to tell, to force their committee clients, their owners corporation clients to close their gyms and pools. I was chatting to a strata manager just this week who said, Amanda, I'm working with a building that has refused to close its gym. We've been locked down now in New South Wales and Greater Sydney for 10 weeks. People have been using the gym. They now have 3 positive cases in their building. They have now decided to close the gym. It's unfortunate that it would have to come to that, and that building may well have more widespread infection because of that decision that it has made. I recommend strongly that gyms and pools be closed, and if committees can make those decisions and do that promptly in the best interests of their residents, then please do go ahead and do that. But I know it's hard for you when you don't have the backing of the law. It is hard to answer a resident when they say, is it the law that we have to close this? The answer to that is no, but it is, with this highly transmissible Delta variant of the virus, a very, very sensible thing to do. So if you are just tuning in, I have just given a summary of the letter that was issued by Dr. Kerry Chant. You can see her sign off there, Chief Health Officer here in New South Wales, a letter addressed Dear Strata Manager, and we have been asked to circulate the contents of that letter to our strata managers, encouraging them to keep strata rolls up to date, make sure strata rolls are up to date in the event there needs to be some contact and contact tracing via New South Wales Health. And for the first time, we are being told that gyms, lounges and theatres, I want to know this building that has a lounge and theatre. Cool. They should be closed. They should be closed at this time, and we are all pushing for this to be made law in our New South Wales public health order. All right, so a few comments have come in while I have been looking over at that screen. I am going to head back over there. I might come back to those pets comments a little bit later. Colin is here. Hey, Colin. Good to see you. Great to attend late from lockdown level 3 in New Zealand. Welcome to the party, Colin. Brandon saying hi. Natalie is saying tenants, needs the property managers to step up. Was that in relation to pets, Nat? Just let me know. Hey, Jared. Okay, Tony is saying, hi, Amanda. We have an owner who refuses to advise the number of tenants, excuse me, on level 4 of a 3-level penthouse, even though we have a COVID plan and we have more visitors than tenants coming and going. Yeah, really, really difficult. I am hearing more and more, especially this week, about buildings where there are difficult tenants, including in one example, extreme perhaps, where there is partying, drug taking, drug dealing, most likely going on in an apartment, and it has become impossible for the building manager, the committee to control what is going on there, and the residents are incredibly fearful that the virus is going to take hold. Absolutely be notifying the police. And somebody did ask a couple of weeks ago here on live how best to notify the police, and New South Wales Police are directing people to Crime Stoppers. I did have a link that I posted in that last live. I'll just put a call out there to Rochelle if she can find that link, and we'll post it here for today's live as well. Wherever you think that the public health orders are being breached, there are more people, there are visitors to an apartment, and we're not supposed to be having visitors, at least not for the purpose of parties and wild behaviour at this time in New South Wales. Definitely reporting that to Crime Stoppers. I understand this is a different situation this week and the last couple of weeks than what it has been in our previous months, where our police are incredibly overworked, our ambulance officers are incredibly overworked, and our hospitals are certainly getting there. So still do your best to report breaches of the public health orders. And from a strata law perspective, Tony, I'm not sure what state you are in, but definitely there is a requirement in our strata legislation, Strata Schemes Management Act, and also in our Residential Tenancies Act in New South Wales, that a landlord gives this information, the details of tenants, to the owner's corporation, and it is a penalty provision. There is a financial penalty for failure to comply with that section of our Strata Schemes Management Act. One of the managers might tell me, but I think it's maybe $200 or $500, a nominal fee, that penalty provision. Sometimes just reminding landlords or agents that that is the law and that there is a penalty, for a financial penalty for failure to comply, can get the information out of them, get you notified as to who everybody is. Incredibly important, as we're hearing from New South Wales, to know who is in our strata buildings, so that if there is a positive case, everybody can be notified as soon as possible. Brandon is asking, if a strata manager has been informed of a case within a building, do they have a duty of care to inform residents immediately, or do they have to wait for confirmation under the New South Wales Health Advice and distribute after that advice? Brandon, I would be saying at the moment, now that we are seeing, and I've experienced this personally with members of my family who have been close contacts, we have been seeing unacceptable and dangerous delays in the New South Wales Health contact tracing system. Some people are waiting 7 to 10 days to be told that they have been a close contact, but they know that they have because they've checked into a venue and the venue has told them quite promptly, or their friend or their relative has told them quite promptly. I'd be putting strata managers, at least from a personal perspective, I'm not going to comment on the legal perspective, but definitely from a personal perspective, if a strata manager is aware that there is a positive case with a resident in a building, I see absolutely no harm and an incredible amount of good in sharing that information, the fact of the positive case, not the identity of the person who's tested positive, but the fact that there's a positive case in the building, sharing that information with residents ASAP. really, really important to get that information out. I remain hopeful that New South Wales Health, and we are seeing police involvement here in New South Wales when we have outbreaks in apartment buildings, that their involvement would be quite prompt, bearing in mind the risk that we have when we're all living so closely together in apartment buildings. But if a strata manager knows and they keep that information to themselves for a week or 10 days because they haven't heard from New South Wales Health, I'd be quite concerned about that. Others who are tuning in may have a different view, but I do know that certainly in the suburb that I'm living in and with my family members, I've been incredibly grateful when I have been told way ahead of any contact from New South Wales Health that I have, or that a family member has been a close contact and should be in isolation. The virus can just spread so quickly, and that is indeed what we're seeing happen in New South Wales and now in Victoria, because our contract tracers just can't keep up. Scrolling down for some more comments here. I'm just going down to clarify Natalie's comment earlier. She was mentioning keeping a strata roll with accurate tenant contact details. Yes, I think Natalie was saying getting the property managers, the agents, to give you those details is really the difficult task. And I have made a suggestion there, but maybe citing the provision of the legislation, and that this is a penalty provision that exposes the landlord owner to financial penalty, may help. Jane is saying there are police going to strata buildings, sad but necessary, especially if a COVID positive person is breaching their quarantine orders. Donna is saying, hi, Amanda, what do you think about outdoor pools, playgrounds, tennis courts being closed as well? It really depends on the structure. It's not the structure, the layout, the way that the building is designed, Donna, I think. It is difficult when we're talking about outdoor areas and playgrounds, when we're talking about kids who need to remain active and engaged and out of their parents' hair. It's a really tough call. I imagine in most of our communities, these areas are perhaps not as spacious, is maybe the word that I'm looking for, spacious as they could be, and they're difficult to maintain. It's difficult for people to be able to use them with appropriate distancing, especially when we're talking about kids who just don't get social distancing. I know, at least where I live, I'm not sure if this is the case all around Sydney, playgrounds are closed, public playgrounds are closed. I think acting conservatively and closing these areas is going to make sure that your committee, in terms of liability and complaints perhaps from residents, or why didn't you, we're being faced with, just as our Premier has been faced with, why didn't you close this earlier? You'd probably be well placed to be making that decision to close. As I have always said, making that decision as a committee, if you can, putting out the question to your owners to make sure that you're not acting unilaterally. It's not one person, the chairperson or the building manager, making these decisions. But it's making it so hard for us when we don't have the law there to tell us what we should be doing. And we are just trying to make the least worst decision in a difficult time. Jane was saying, I think it will now put their insurance at risk if they do not do it. Yeah, fair enough, Jane. If they do not close, I think, gyms, pools, lounges and theatres, as Dr. Kerry Chant asks us in this letter. Perhaps, yes, there is an insurance issue there for sure. But it does put us in such a grey area because we don't have this requirement in our health orders. Coming back up to Claire's comment, what do you do where the public is still able to walk through our common property and the owners corporation cannot prevent this because of the council DA conditions, even though the public health order is clear about what is a place of residence? Yep, these are the beautiful, challenging grey areas that we have in our strata law, Claire, that at the best of times make strata lawyers very excited and intellectually engaged. At the worst of times, they make for scary situations and put our residents at risk. Members of the public walking through your common property absolutely should be wearing masks, that's for sure. I think the law is pretty clear about that we all should be wearing masks when we step outside. But correct that the owners corporation is not able to prevent this. And I know that some buildings are really suffering because of this, large communities where they do have members of the public that they just have no legal right to be able to restrict or to control. So the best we can do is to be practicing social distancing, staying at home as best we can, wearing our masks, making sure that we do all of those small, smart steps to be able to protect ourselves and our families and our neighbours. Coming back on down, I'm seeing Patricia's comment. Love the colour and style of your hair. Did you find a hairdresser? All us ladies are getting desperate. Well, Patricia, is this what everybody has been wondering? My hair is different today because I have it pinned back because I've succumbed. COVID has got me now, guys. I haven't been in lockdown as long as you have because I'm in regional New South Wales, but I've been in lockdown long enough now that the hair is starting to suffer. So I don't have my usual down style. I've gone with an up style, au moins, in front of the bathroom mirror. And the color is simply because I think it's a bit blonder on the top than it is on the bottom. Okay, you know what I'm talking about, right? So no hairdresser. I'm very loyal to my hairdresser in Sydney, who when I'm able to, and I'm back and forth between Sydney and my home here in the regions, I'm very loyal to her, and she did send me a pack a few weeks ago, as I know some ladies here have enjoyed, to be able to top up that color. But when you are a short-haired lady and you're in lockdown, things do get a little wild. So that's all that's happening here. Thank you for asking. That's very kind. Tony is saying that 2 reports to Crime Stoppers, and yet you're in Tweed Heads, great. Police are too busy to even reply. It's awful, Tony. Really, really tough situation. Yes, Jane, I think, is responding to Natalie's comment about all well and good to tell us to update the strata rolls, keep the strata rolls up to date, but we don't get told by the property managers, the agents who are managing these properties, who the tenants are, when there are new tenants. How are we supposed to deal with that? And Jane is saying, yes, I doubt whether REI, the Real Estate Institute, got the letter, but good point. The tenants union has the letter. Yes, the destination of this letter seemed to be a little bit scattered. We're not quite sure. Some organisations who we thought would have got the letter didn't get it, but helpfully, as our sector is so good at doing, working cooperatively, I think we've managed to get it out to as many people as possible. Yes, it's important that our property managers, agents, are involved in this conversation and make sure they understand too. I agree, Natalie and Jane, the importance of them letting us know, letting strata managers know, the strata sector know who new tenants are. Henry's saying, for multiple breaches of health orders, I would like to be able to commence eviction proceedings against tenants. Yep. Yeah, some people would say, Henry, for multiple breaches of the bylaws. That would be a nice power to have, not one that we have in Australia, sadly for some owners and committees. David is saying, taking your advice, I asked a neighbour why he wasn't wearing a mask in the common area, considering we had signs plastered all over the walls. He texted me later that he was holding his breath and that he felt this was more effective than masks. Good grief. We've got to write these down. We just have to. You can't make this stuff up, guys. This is Strata for you. Good on you, David, for attempting to take my advice and enforce your mask wearing on the common property. I'm sorry to hear that was the response. He obviously wasn't holding his breath while he was talking to you. Okay, lots more comments coming on in here. I'm just looking for some questions that I can help you with. Hey, Jimmy, I didn't know you were here. I'm going to pop Jimmy's comment. I haven't read this yet. This is dangerous. I was listening to your piece on the chat letter when a lawyer called on a completely different issue. I just want to say that if New South Wales Health had simply confirmed the bodgy-looking letter was real, It would have saved lots of concern and confusion. I think New South Wales Health is suffering from God doctor syndrome when it comes to strata. Yes, Jimmy, if you're just tuning in, you may not have caught it all. I've shown everybody the letter and I've gone through it. And indeed, we have received confirmation that the letter is real. It's not a fake. There was some concern that it was an odd letter. I agree, it has some strange words in it. Gyms, lounges, and theatres are not the least of the odd words. But indeed, yes, it is a real letter. And why do you have lawyers calling you at this time on a Friday, Jimmy? That is not on. Thank you for tuning in and for sharing your comment. Okay. Jane is just asking, why would the DA override a public health order? The DA say lots of things about use and access. It's a good question. Yes, that was going back to an earlier question asked about how the members of the public can continue to be coming through the common property pursuant to a DA. Very good point, Jane. That is worth looking into, definitely. Michelle is laughing. Only women would talk about hair. Yes, only hair on Friday Live. Tony is asking for a copy of the Dr. Kerry Chant letter. Yes, more than happy to make that copy available. Didn't have time this afternoon to get it uploaded to the site. So Rochelle, would you mind uploading that to our site so we have a link and just posting it back here? Something else that I didn't make clear when I was sharing the letter, I'll go back and share it now if I am still able to do that. Yes, I'm just trying to share only this letter and not my personal emails. Down the bottom here, there is an email address and I have blacked it out only because this broadcast goes out to quite a few people, particularly on the replay, and I don't want to inundate New South Wales Health with too many emails. So that's the only thing that has been changed in this letter, that I have blacked out that email address so as not to broadcast that to the Facebook world. But I was made privy to a covering email that came with this letter, and the direction was indeed to circulate this to Strata managers. So Tony, we will get a link for you so you can, and anybody else interested, can get their hands on a copy of the Chant letter. Great question here from Michelle, just heading back to the issue of pets. Do you think the laws around tenants keeping pets will change? My daughter was denied a pet in a pet-friendly building. Yeah, really important. I mentioned this in the podcast last week, that even if the building is pet-friendly, the owner's corporation says pets are allowed, or an application can be made for the keeping of a pet and not unreasonably refused, that kind of thing. A landlord, an owner, can still say, I don't want a pet in my apartment and I don't want the tenant keeping a pet in my apartment. That's in New South Wales. The law is different in Victoria. And as I understand it, I haven't looked at this for a little while, but the tenant can challenge a landlord's decision to refuse a pet, and the landlord has to have some pretty good grounds to be refusing a pet in their property, whether it's a house or whether it's an apartment. So Victoria is different, but in New South Wales, yes, if the landlord says no, even if the Strata building is pet friendly, then the tenant unfortunately can't keep a pet. I think it will, to answer your question, Michelle. I think it will change, particularly as we've seen that change in Victoria. I'm not sure what the rules are in Queensland. New South Wales is sometimes a little bit behind when it comes to this kind of progressive law reform, but I'm hopeful that that will change, but sadly not the case at the moment. Patricia's saying, I received my letter from SCA. Great, so that's the Kerry Chant letter. Yes, Chris did let me know that that was being circulated. Chris also let me know, as I said earlier, Chris Duggan, I'm talking about the president of SCA New South Wales. He also let me know that they're advocating very hard to government to change the public health order so that this is not just a recommendation, not just a suggestion, not just please strata managers, can you do something else for us, add to your long list, but the law, put it in the public health order that pools and gyms in residential buildings need to be closed. It is in the public health order that recreational facilities that are open to members of the public are to be closed. But the lawyers are of one mind here, at least those that I have been talking to, that that doesn't include our residential apartment buildings, because those pools, not all of those pools, some are, but pools, if I use that example, they're not open to members of the public. They're open to residents and invitees of residents. So they're not captured by that direction to close. Yes, at first we thought this was an oversight, but the fact that we continue to ask for this change to our orders and we continue not to get it, we're not quite sure why that message is not getting through. We've tried to make quite clear that it is legal to make that change and put that requirement into our public health orders. Claire, I think, Claire, you had the question, you had the point about the DA, and just responding to Jane's comment that you're still waiting for a reply from New South Wales Health on this point. The council has said the public health order does not conflict with the DA, as the public are able to exercise. Interesting, Claire. It'd be interesting to know what your setup is there at your scheme. Excellent. All right. Now, it's Father's Day this Sunday. Dads out there, children of dads, hope that you are able to do something to celebrate your dads during this unique time. I think we had a Mother's Day, at least in Sydney, in lockdown last year. I do remember that. And Father's Day it is this week. I hope that you have some creative ways to celebrate, and happy Father's Day to the dads out there. Thank you all for joining me for our solo today, Friday Live. I don't usually go this long when we are solo because I've run out of breath, run out of voice, but we have had some important topics to cover. And thank you so much for joining me today, this afternoon, for our Friday Live to share in those comments. There's a few here that I haven't got to. I will come back probably with a glass of wine of some sort for a Friday afternoon or Friday evening to check in on those and help you out as best I can. Thank you so much for joining me today. Lots and lots of you tuning in. Hang in there. Hang in there. It is a tough time, but it will not last forever. We will see the other side of this, and I just can't wait to squeeze you all in real life. Squeeze you all. You're going to go running when you see me in an event now. Amanda's going to come and squeeze me, crash tackle me, rugby tackle. I'm going to practice my rugby tackles. That's what I'll be doing. Have a lovely weekend, everybody. I'll see you next time.